The first thing was the heat. The second was the pain. A gasp tore from my throat, dry and ragged. I was on my back, tangled in a single sweat-damp sheet. The air in my bedroom was a physical weight, thick with the smell of dust and old wood and the stale breath of a city-wide heat wave. The oscillating fan in the corner did nothing but stir the hot air around, its weary plastic gears clicking with each turn. Click, whir, click. Something was wrong. Not just the oppressive warmth. A sharp, searing fire burned in my right side, just under my ribs. Reflexively, I clutched at it, my fingers coming away wet and slick. My heart, already hammering from a dream I couldn't quite hold on to, kicked into a frantic runaway rhythm. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. My hand was shaking. I held it up in the gloom, my palm illuminated by the weak orange glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Blood. Dark and glistening. This is impossible. My mind went blank. I fumbled for the switch on the bedside lamp. The cheap bulb sputtered to life, casting harsh shadows across the room. My whole body froze. I carefully, deliberately, pulled up the hem of my gray t-shirt. 3 long parallel gouges were carved into my skin. They were deep. The edges were raw and swollen, beaded with fresh blood that welled up and trickled down my side in slow, warm rivulets. They weren't cuts. They looked like something had clawed me, viciously. I stared, my breath hitched in my throat. I hadn't been out. I hadn't been in a fight. I went to bed after finishing a freelance design gig, exhausted. I hadn't fallen. There was nothing in my bed, nothing in this room sharp enough to do this. Then the dream came rushing back. Not in a clean narrative, but in fractured, terrifying images. Corridors, an endless maze of them, walls the color of dried blood and weeping rust. The air smelled of ozone, like after a lightning strike, and something coppery and old. I was running. My bare feet slapped against gritty concrete, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast, enclosed space. Something was behind me. I never saw it clearly. A suggestion, a flicker of immense height in my peripheral vision. The grotesque geometry of a limb bending the wrong way. And the sound. Above my own ragged breathing and pounding footsteps, there was a sound like thick canvas being slowly, deliberately torn in two. A sound that vibrated in my teeth. In the dream, it had cornered me. I'd stumbled, falling against one of the rusty walls. The thing loomed over me, a column of shadow blotting out the dim, sourceless light. It reached. I felt a pressure, an immense weight crushing my chest. Then the searing pain as something sharp and impossibly strong dragged across my side. I jolted fully upright in bed, the real-world pain flaring in perfect, sickening sync with the memory. My throat was dry. A shiver ran down my spine, despite the heat. Goosebumps prickled on my arms. What the hell is going on? My first rational thought was the phone. I needed to call 911, or a friend, or anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my head spinning. The floorboards groaned as I put my weight on them. I pressed my palm against the wound, a useless gesture. The blood seeped between my fingers. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, I crept out of my bedroom. The small hallway was even darker than my room. To my right, Evelyn's door was closed, a line of solid darkness underneath it. I'd only known her a week. Found her through some vague online ad for a roommate. She was Still, that was the only word for it. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, leaving no trace, making almost no sound. In a week, I think we'd exchanged maybe 100 words. My mind, desperate for an anchor, snagged on her. Could it be? No, that was insane. She was a slip of a girl, couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds. This felt like a bear had swiped me. The living room was a pit of shadows. The city's ambient light painted distorted rectangles on the wall through the large, grimy window. The air hung motionless. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen alcove. Then I saw her. My heart skipped a beat. She was sitting in the rickety wooden chair by the dining table, perfectly silhouetted against the window. Just sitting there. In the dark. As still as a photograph. My muscles tensed up. I couldn't see her face, just the outline of her head and slender shoulders. Her hands were on the table. She wasn't moving. It was as if she had been waiting. "Evelyn?" My voice was a croak. She didn't startle. She didn't even seem to register my presence for a long moment. I took a hesitant step forward, my bare foot sticking to the linoleum. The pain in my side was a constant hot throb. "Evelyn, I think I'm hurt. I need to call someone." She didn't turn. She didn't respond. I stood rooted to the spot, my back pressed against the wall. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, began to cut through the panic. This was wrong. Something was seriously wrong here. "Evelyn?" I said again, louder this time. Slowly, so slowly it was unnerving, she turned her head. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom. I couldn't make out her expression. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't a whisper so much as the absence of volume. It was a flat, monotone sound that the heat seemed to swallow before it could reach me. I had to strain to hear it. "The hallways," she said. My blood froze. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry. My tongue felt thick. How? How could she know? Is this a joke? My head was spinning with a series of questions. She spoke again, her voice holding the same detached, eerie calm. "The rust? The sound?" She paused. "Did it get you too?" I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I leaned against the doorframe, my hand slipping in my own. Blood. My breath came in shallow, sharp bursts. It was an utter absurdity. What are you talking about?" I managed to stammer out, the words feeling alien in my mouth. "How do you know that?" She didn't answer my question. Instead, she did something that shattered the last remnants of my rational world. With a slow, fluid motion, she stood up. She was wearing a thin tank top and shorts, just like me. She turned to face me fully, a darker shadow against the window's pale light. Then, she lifted the hem of her tank top. I couldn't believe my eyes. There, on her right side, in the exact same spot as my own injury, were 3 identical gouges. They glistened wetly in the faint light, stark and brutal against her pale skin. The same length, the same spacing, the same raw, angry depth. A perfect, impossible mirror of the wound's weeping blood onto my own hand. Time seemed to stop. The humming from the refrigerator faded. The distant city noise vanished. The only sound in the universe was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart. I stared at her wound, then glanced down at my own hand, still pressed to my side. Back to her. It wasn't similar. It was identical. My whole body began to shake uncontrollably. How? I whispered. It was the only word I could form. How can this be? Evelyn let her shirt fall. She moved back to the table and sat down, her movements graceful and unhurried. It was the calm that was the most terrifying part. She wasn't scared. She wasn't in pain. She was observing. She didn't look at me. Instead, she placed her hand flat on the cheap wooden table. With a single long finger, she began to trace the swirling patterns of the fake wood grain, as if she were reading a map only she could see. "It has found purchase," she said, her voice still a low, even murmur. The phrase was strange, archaic, not "it's latched on" or "it's got us." It has found purchase. "What has?" I choked out, taking another clumsy step into the room. "What are you talking about? Who did this to us?" She stopped tracing the grain. She lifted her head, and for the first time I could see her eyes in the dim light. They were dark pools, reflecting nothing. There was no fear in them, no panic, just a deep, unsettling emptiness. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked. Not a real question. A statement. The connection. It's not just the wound. It's the space between the wounds. As she spoke, I felt it. A cold thrumming deep in my bones. The pain in my side pulsed, a hot, angry beat. And for a terrifying second, I felt an echo of it. As if another heart was beating in time with mine, somewhere else in the room. Her heart. Her pain. Our pain. My mind recoiled from the thought. It was a violation. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing me. "This is a dream," I said, more to myself than to her. "I'm still dreaming. I hit my head. Carbon monoxide." Any explanation, anything but the truth that was standing in front of me, printed in blood on both our bodies. She gave a small shake of her head. "The dream is the workshop. This," she gestured vaguely at the room, at us, "is the gallery." Under her breath, so low I almost missed it, she began to hum. It was a simple looping melody, a discordant, tuneless little thing, and my soul flew away. It was the tune from the dream, the one I hadn't even realized I'd heard. A faint background music in the rust-colored hallways, almost drowned out by the tearing canvas and my own panicked flight. I stared at her, frozen in a new dimension of terror. She knew the hallways. She knew the sound. She knew the tune. And she wore my wound like a matching scar. We were two strangers, brought together by an online ad, and tonight, in this sweltering, ugly apartment, we had bled from the same nightmare. The creature from my dream hadn't just gotten me, it had gotten us, and the airborne sense of unreality began to solidify into a horrifying concrete fact. We weren't waking up from this. We were already awake. My world snapped into focus with two distinct, vicious sensations. The first was the heat. The second was the pain. A sound, something between a gasp and a choke, tore itself from my throat. I was on my back, a single sheet twisted around my legs like a damp, suffocating vine. The air in my bedroom was not just air. It was a presence, a physical weight pressing down. It was thick with the scent of old wood, sun-baked dust, and the cloying, stagnant breath of a city trapped in a week-long heat wave. In the corner, an old oscillating fan swiveled its head back and forth, its cheap plastic gears complaining with a tired, rhythmic click and whir. Click, whir, click. A metronome counting down to nothing. Something was wrong. Not the heat, not the fan. Something deeper. A clean, sharp fire was burning in my right side. A hot poker pressed just beneath my ribs. My hand shot to the spot by reflex, my fingers meeting a slick, startling wetness. My heart, already a frantic drum from a nightmare that was dissolving like smoke, kicked into a new, terrifying gear. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic bird trapped against my ribs. My hand was shaking. I held it up in the gloom, my palm catching the weak, jaundiced orange from the streetlight outside my window. Blood. Glistening, dark, and undeniably real. This is impossible. My mind went blank. All thought, all reason, just stopped. I fumbled for the switch on the cheap lamp beside my bed. A click, a sputter, and a naked bulb flooded the small room with a harsh, unforgiving light, carving deep shadows out of the corners. My whole body froze. I moved with a slow, deliberate dread, my fingers hooking the hem of my gray t-shirt. I lifted it. 3 long, parallel gouges were carved into my skin. They were not cuts. They were furrows. The edges were raw and puffy, weeping beads of fresh blood that welled up and traced slow, warm paths down my side and onto the sweat-damp sheet. It looked as though something had raked me with a garden tool, viciously. I just stared, my breath hitched somewhere in my throat. I hadn't been out. I hadn't been in a fight. I'd crashed into bed after 13 straight hours on a freelance graphic design project, my brain fried and my body aching. I hadn't fallen. There was nothing in this room, nothing in this bed, sharp enough to do this. And then the dream came rushing back. It didn't return as a story. It came in shards of pure terror. Corridors, an endless looping maze of them. The walls were the color of rust and dried blood, weeping a dark, oily sheen. The air had a smell, sharp and electric like ozone after a lightning strike, layered over something metallic and old, coppery. I was running. My bare feet slapped against a gritty concrete floor, the sound echoing in a way that felt too loud, too vast for the enclosed space. Something was behind me. I never saw it. Not really. Just a suggestion. A flicker in my peripheral vision of impossible height. A glimpse of the grotesque geometry of a limb bending in a way a limb should not bend. And the sound. Beneath my own ragged breathing and the frantic slap of my feet, there was a sound like thick, heavy canvas being slowly, deliberately torn in two. It was a sound that didn't just enter my ears. It vibrated in my teeth, in the bones of my skull. In the dream, it had finally cornered me. I'd stumbled, my shoulder slamming against one of the weeping rust walls. The thing loomed over me, a column of pure shadow that blotted out the dim, sourceless light. It reached for me. I felt a pressure, an immense, crushing weight on my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. Then the searing, white-hot pain as something sharp and impossibly strong dragged itself across my side. I sat bolt upright in bed, a strangled cry escaping my lips. The real-world pain in my side flared in perfect, sickening unison with the dream memory. My throat was dry. A violent shiver ran down my spine, a bizarre counterpoint to the sweltering heat. Goosebumps prickled on my arms. What the hell is going on? The first rational thought to pierce the panic was the phone. Call 911. Call a friend. Call anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my head reeling. The old floorboards groaned under my weight. I pressed the palm of my hand flat against the wound, a useless, instinctive gesture. The blood was warm and slick between my fingers. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, I crept out of my bedroom. The short hallway was a tunnel of darkness. To my right, Evelyn's bedroom door was shut. A solid, unbroken line of black lay underneath it. She'd only been here a week. I'd found her through a vague ad on a roommate site. She was still. That was the only word I had for her. She moved through the apartment like a current of air, leaving no trace, making almost no sound. In 7 days, I think we had exchanged maybe 100 words. My mind, desperate for any kind of anchor, snagged on her. Could it be? No, that was insane. I'd seen her lift a gallon of milk and she looked like it was a major effort. She was a slip of a girl, couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds. This felt like I'd been mauled by a bear. The living room was a pit of shadows and faint, distorted shapes. The city's perpetual orange glow painted weak, warped rectangles on the wall through the large, grimy window. The air was dead, motionless. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the ancient refrigerator from the kitchen alcove. Then I saw her. My heart skipped a beat. She was sitting in the rickety wooden chair at the dining table. A perfect silhouette against the window. Just sitting, in the dark, as still as a piece of furniture. My muscles tensed up, every nerve fiber screaming. It was as if she had been waiting. I couldn't see her face, just the clean, sharp outline of her head and slender shoulders. Her hands were resting on the surface of the table. She wasn't moving a muscle. "Evelyn?" My voice was a croak, a dry rasp. She didn't startle. She didn't flinch. For a long, stretched-out moment, she didn't even seem to register that I had spoken. I took a hesitant step forward, my bare foot making a soft, sticky sound on the linoleum. The pain in my side was a constant hot throb, a metronome of agony. "Evelyn, I think I'm hurt. I need to call someone." She didn't turn. She didn't respond. I stood rooted to the spot, my back pressed against the wall. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, began to slice through the hot panic. This was wrong. Something was seriously wrong here. "Evelyn?" I tried again, my voice louder, tighter. Slowly, with an unnerving, fluid lack of urgency, she turned her head. Her face was a pale, blank oval in the gloom. I couldn't make out her expression. It was like looking at a mannequin. When she finally spoke, her voice was strange. It wasn't a whisper. It was a sound with all the volume removed, a flat, monotone delivery that the heat seemed to absorb before it could properly reach my ears. I had to strain to hear it. "The hallways," she said. My blood froze. The words hung in the dead air between us. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry. My tongue felt like a lead weight. How? How could she know? Is this a joke? My head was spinning with a series of questions that had no answers. She spoke again, her voice holding that same detached, eerie calm. "The rust. The sound." She paused, and the silence that followed was deafening. "Did it get you too?" A wave of vertigo washed over me. I had to brace myself against the doorframe, my hand slipping in my own blood. My breath came in shallow, sharp little bursts. It was an utter absurdity, a complete and total violation of reality. "What? What are you talking about?" I stammered, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in my mouth. "How do you know that?" She didn't answer my question. Instead, she did something that shattered the last, desperate remnants of my rational world into a million pieces. With a slow, deliberate grace, she stood up. She was wearing a thin tank top and shorts, just like me. She turned to face me fully, a darker shadow against the window's pale light. Then, with the same unhurried motion, she lifted the hem of her tank top. I couldn't believe my eyes. There, on her right side, in the exact same spot as my own injury, were 3 identical gouges. They glistened wetly in the faint light, stark and brutal against her pale skin. The same length, the same spacing, the same raw, angry depth. A perfect, impossible mirror of the wounds that were still weeping blood onto my own hand. Time seemed to stop. The hum of the refrigerator faded into nothing. The distant muted sounds of the city vanished. The only sound left in the entire universe was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart against my ribs. I stared at her wound, then glanced down at my own hand, still pressed tight to my side. I looked back to her. It wasn't similar. It was identical. My whole body began to shake uncontrollably. "How?" I whispered. It was the only word my brain could form. "How can this be?" Evelyn let her shirt fall. She moved back to the table and sat down, her movements as fluid and unhurried as before. It was the calm that was the most terrifying part. She wasn't scared. She wasn't in pain. She looked clinical. She didn't look at me. Instead, she placed her hand flat on the cheap wood of the table. With a single long finger, she began to trace the swirling patterns of the fake wood grain, as if she were reading a map only she could see. "It has found purchase," she said, her voice still a low, even murmur. The phrase was so strange, stilted, archaic. Not, "it's latched on," or "it's got us." It has found purchase. "What has?" I choked out, taking another clumsy step into the room. "What are you talking about? Who did this to us?" She stopped tracing the grain. She lifted her head, and for the first time her eyes met mine in the dim light. They were dark pools, reflecting nothing. There was no fear in them, no panic. There was just a deep, unsettling emptiness. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. The connection. It's not just the wound. It's the space between the wounds. As she spoke the words, I felt it. A cold thrumming deep in my bones, an alien vibration. The pain in my side pulsed, a hot, angry beat. And for a terrifying, gut-wrenching second, I felt an echo of it, as if another heart was beating in time with mine, somewhere else in the room. Her heart, her pain, our pain. My mind recoiled violently from the thought. It was a violation, an intimacy I never asked for, forced upon me. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. "This is a dream," I said, the words a desperate prayer to myself. "I'm still dreaming. I hit my head. It's the heat. Carbon monoxide." Any explanation? Anything at all but the impossible truth that was sitting in the chair in front of me, a truth written in blood on both our bodies. She gave a small, slow shake of her head. "The dream is the workshop. This," she gestured vaguely with one hand at the room, at us, "is the gallery." Under her breath, so low I almost missed it, she began to hum. A simple, looping melody. A discordant, tuneless little thing, made of only 3 or 4 notes that didn't belong together. And my soul flew away. It was the tune from the dream. The faint background music I hadn't even consciously registered in the rust-colored hallways. a little nursery rhyme of madness almost drowned out by the tearing canvas and my own panicked flight. I stared at her, frozen in a new dimension of terror that dwarfed everything I had felt before. She knew the hallways. She knew the sound. She knew the tune. And she wore my wound like a matching piece of jewelry. We were two strangers, brought together by a random online ad, and tonight, in this sweltering, ugly apartment, we had bled from the same nightmare. The thing from my dream hadn't just gotten me. It had gotten us. The fragile sense of unreality I'd been clinging to shattered, and what was left was a horrifying concrete fact. We weren't waking up from this. We were already awake. My brain was a dead wire. The humming stopped, but the melody echoed in the hollow space behind my eyes. It was a parasite. It had burrowed into my memory, and now it was living there, looping endlessly. I stared at her, at this complete stranger who wore my nightmare on her skin and hummed its awful song. The shaking in my limbs wasn't just a tremor anymore. It was a violent, full-body shudder. A machine coming apart at the bolts. "No," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "No, that's not possible." My mind, what was left of it, scrambled for a lifeline. It latched onto the only fragments of sense it could find, half-remembered articles and late-night documentaries. "It's the heat," I said, my voice rising, gaining a hysterical edge. "It's carbon monoxide. From the old furnace. It causes hallucinations. Shared hallucinations." Evelyn didn't even blink. Her expression remained a placid, unreadable mask. "The furnace is broken. The pilot light went out last Tuesday." My argument collapsed. I had no response. I remembered complaining to the landlord about it myself. "Another explanation, then? Anything else?" "Shared psychosis," I blurted, the term feeling clumsy and academic on my tongue. "Folie à deux. It happens. One person's delusion gets transferred to another, in close quarters. Stress." This time, she almost smiled. It was a brief, horrifying twitch at the corner of her mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. It held no humor. It was the furthest thing from warmth I had ever seen. She lifted her hand from the table, the one that had been tracing the wood grain. She turned it over, palm up. In the center of her palm was a small, angry red mark, like a burn from a cigarette. "Was this in your delusion too?" she asked, her voice the same flat, textureless thing. I automatically looked at my own hands. My breath caught. There, on my left palm, in the exact same spot, was an identical mark. A perfect, circular burn. I hadn't even felt it. Amidst the searing agony in my side, this smaller pain had gone completely unnoticed. It was another piece of the dream clicking into place. I remembered falling, my hands thrown out to catch myself, my palms slapping against a hot pipe that ran along the floor of one of the corridors. My blood froze. My last bastion of logic crumbled into dust. This wasn't a delusion. It was a receipt. Proof of a transaction I hadn't agreed to. "What is this?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. I felt a chill run down my spine, so cold it was painful against my sweat-slick skin. "What the hell is going on?" Evelyn lowered her hand and placed it back on the table. Her long, pale finger found the swirling pattern in the cheap laminate again, tracing its path as if it were a river on a map. "I told you. It has found purchase. It needs two. It works in the space between." "What works?" I demanded, taking a step closer. The floorboards groaned. The pain in my side pulsed in time with my heart, a sickening, wet rhythm. "What is it?" "The thing in the hallways," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The tall thing. The thing with the sound." We stood there in the charged, thick air. The refrigerator hummed. A car horn blared somewhere blocks away, a sound from a different, saner world. I needed to understand. I needed to see the edges of this thing. If I couldn't explain it away, maybe I could map it out. "The dream," I started, forcing myself to think, to remember. "It started. I was falling. Just for a second. Then my feet hit the floor. I was just there. In the first corridor," she finished for me, her finger never stopping its slow journey across the table. "The one that smells like wet metal and ozone." Goosebumps erupted on my arms. "Yes, I ran. I took a left turn. There was a stain on the wall." "Shaped like a broken bird," she said, not looking up. "The right wing is bent down, touching the floor." My stomach clenched. I could see it perfectly in my mind, the dark rust-colored stain. I had thought it looked like an ink blot, but she was right. It was a bird. A broken bird. "I kept running," I said, my voice shaking. "There was a dead end, a steel door with no handle." "A grate," she added. "High up on the left wall. You can hear something moving behind it." I could. I remembered the scratching sound. Skittering. My muscles tensed up, just remembering. I turned back. I went down another hall. It was longer. There were lights, but they were flickering. 3 lights, she murmured. The middle one was already dead. This is impossible. The precision was what terrified me. It wasn't a similar story. It was a shared script. Every step, every sensory detail, it was all there, duplicated perfectly in her mind. We were looking at the same map. "The sound," I said. "The tearing sound. It got louder there." "It's always louder when you're close to it," she said. Her fingers stopped moving. She finally lifted her head, her dark eyes locking onto mine. "It pinned you against the wall with the weeping seam, the one that drips the black oil." I couldn't speak. I could only nod. My throat was dry. "It crushed the air out of you," she continued, her voice so low it was almost inaudible, forcing me to lean in. It was like she was reciting a prayer. "And then it reached out. With the 3 claws," I finished, my hand instinctively tightening over the wound in my side. The slickness of the blood was a nauseating confirmation. We were silent again. The weight of our shared memory settled in the room, a palpable presence. We had been in the same place, suffered the same violence. And this woman, this stranger, had been my unwitting companion. The intimacy of it was grotesque. I felt violated on a level I didn't have words for. It was like she had been inside my head, rummaging through my darkest fears. I backed away, putting the dining table between us. I needed space. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. My eyes scanned the room, the familiar junk of my life. A stack of graphic novels, my laptop bag, a dirty coffee mug. All of it seemed alien now. Props on a stage. The gallery, she'd called it. "Why?" I asked, my voice strained. "Why us? We don't even know each other." "It doesn't care," she said, her gaze drifting towards the front door. "It just needs an anchor, and then it needs a mirror." She looked at me. "I was the anchor. You're the mirror." The words made no sense. but they sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. Anchor? Mirror? It sounded like something from a madman's sermon. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her stillness. Her unnerving calm. The strange, formal way she spoke. She had been here a week of sleeping in the room next to mine. Had she been dreaming this all along? Was I just the new variable? "You've had this dream before," I said. It wasn't a question. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "With the last one." My heart pounded. The last one. The roommate before me. The ad I answered had said the room was available because her old roommate had to leave suddenly. "What happened to him?" Evelyn's eyes became unfocused, as if she were looking at a memory playing out on the far wall. "He got scared. He tried to fight it. He boarded up his door. He screamed a lot." She paused. "One night, the screaming just stopped. In the morning, his room was empty. The boards were still on the door, from the inside." My whole body went rigid. I stared at the closed door to her bedroom, then at my own. An empty room. Boards on the door. It was an impossible image. A locked room mystery from a horror novel. But the proof of its possibility was bleeding through my shirt. A desperate primal urge to flee seized me. To just run. Out the door, down the stairs, into the street. It didn't matter where. Anywhere but here. I took a step towards the front door, my body moving on pure instinct. My hand was reaching for the deadbolt. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first. So faint, I thought it was the blood rushing in my ears, or a trick of the heat-addled silence. A sound from the other side of the door, from the hallway. Rape! I froze in place, my hand hovering inches from the lock. My breath hitched. It was a soft, dry, tearing sound. Unmistakable. I had just spent what felt like an eternity running from that exact noise. My head snapped towards Evelyn. Her back was ramrod straight. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the front door. She had heard it too. Her unnatural composure was finally gone, replaced by the same stark terror that was gripping me. Her lips were parted, but no sound came out. She raised one hand, a finger pressed to her lips in a universal sign for silence. I didn't need the warning. I was already holding my breath, straining my ears. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to have vanished. The city outside was gone. There was only the thick, hot air of the apartment and the space on the other side of that door. It was louder this time. Closer. A slow, deliberate pull. The sound of thick canvas being methodically torn. It was not a human sound. It was not a sound a building should make. It was the sound of the dream, and it was in the hallway. Our hallway. On the 3rd floor of a locked building. A hallway that should have been, that had to be, empty. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I took a slow, silent step back from the door, my bare feet making a soft, sticky noise on the floor. I looked at Evelyn. Her face, a pale circle in the gloom, was a mask of pure dread. The emptiness in her eyes was filled now. It was filled with the thing from the hallways. It was here. It had followed us out. Or maybe it had been waiting for us to wake up. The gallery was open, and something was at the door. The sound was a razor blade slicing through the thick, hot air. My hand, reaching for the deadbolt, froze in midair. Inches from the metal. Inches from freedom. My whole body went rigid. I forgot to breathe. Every muscle tensed, coiled like a spring. Behind me, I knew Evelyn was doing the same. The sudden kinship of our shared terror was a cold, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. We were two statues listening. Closer, louder. Directly outside the door. It wasn't just in the hallway anymore. It was at our threshold. The sound of tearing canvas. The sound of something being flayed. It was the signature of the thing from the dream. A calling card left on our doorstep. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What is this? What the hell is going on? My mind raced. A frantic animal in a cage. It had followed us. It had come out of the dream and was physically here, on this floor, outside this door, a hallway that was supposed to be empty, a building that was supposed to be locked. The logic fell apart, turning to sand in my hands. I took a step back, then another. My bare feet made a sticky, peeling sound on the linoleum floor. Each step was a thunderclap in the crushing stillness. I risked a glance at Evelyn. Her face was a white oval in the gloom, her eyes fixed on the door. The blankness was gone. The unnatural calm was gone. In its place was a primal fear, the same fear that had its claws in my own throat. For a single insane moment, that made it better. I wasn't alone. She was as terrified as I was. We were in this together. And then the sound stopped. The silence it left behind was worse. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered everything. The hum of the refrigerator returned, sounding impossibly loud. A floorboard settled somewhere in the apartment with a soft groan. I strained my ears, holding my breath until my lungs burned. I listened for a footstep, for breathing, for anything. There was nothing, just the thick, humming silence of a hot summer night. It was gone. Or it was waiting. Time seemed to stop. Seconds stretched into minutes. We stood there, two prisoners staring at the door to our cell. My eyes darted between the deadbolt and Evelyn. My survival instinct screamed at me to slam the bolt home, to wedge a chair under the knob, to barricade us in. But a colder thought paralyzed me. What if it wasn't outside anymore? What if the sound had just been a distraction? My gaze settled on Evelyn. She was no longer looking at the door. She was looking at me. The terror had receded from her face, replaced by that unnerving placidity. It was like watching a mask slide back into place. How could she be so calm? How could she turn it off like that? The fear in her eyes had been real. I was sure of it. But now it was gone. "It knows we're awake," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it cut through the room. It was not the voice of the terrified woman from a moment ago. It was flat, detached. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, it knows?" "It doesn't like to be heard," she continued, her eyes unblinking. "It prefers the hunt. In the dream. When you're running." Something is wrong here. The fear was twisting inside me, changing shape. The terror of the thing outside was being replaced by a new dread, a colder, sharper dread that was directed at the person inside with me. I was the mirror, she had said. She was the anchor. What does that mean? My back pressed against the kitchen counter, putting more space between us. My eyes scanned the room, the cheap table, the two chairs. Her, standing by the door, me, by the sink. 2 pieces on a board. I felt like I was missing the rules to the game. "You knew this would happen," I said. It wasn't a question. "You knew it could get out." She didn't answer. Instead, she began to hum. It was so faint at first I thought I was imagining it. A low, tuneless sound from the back of her throat. It was a simple, looping melody. A broken music box. A nursery rhyme from hell. Goosebumps erupted on my arms. It was the tune from the gallery, the one that played just before the thing appeared. My blood froze. She was humming its song. "Stop that!" I snapped, my voice cracking. She stopped. Her lips pressed together. She looked at me, her head tilted slightly, an expression of mild confusion on her face, as if I'd just yelled at her for breathing. But there was a flicker in her eyes. A tell. She was putting on a facade. "This is impossible!" The thought hammered at me again. She wasn't just a victim. She couldn't be. She was connected to it. A lightning rod. A beacon. Was she drawing it here? Was she the reason it had latched onto me? The week she'd been here, sleeping one wall away from me. Had she been casting a net in her sleep, and I was the unlucky fish who swam into it? I needed to be away from her, right now. "I'm going to my room," I said, the words stiff. I didn't wait for a reply. I pushed off the counter and walked, deliberately, not running, past her. I kept the dining table between us. I could feel her eyes on my back the entire way. The pain in my side flared, a sharp, hot reminder of the wound we shared. Our shared skin. The thought was nauseating. I reached my bedroom door, my hand closing around the cool brass of the knob. I turned it, pulled the door open, and stepped inside. Without a moment's hesitation, I closed it behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the charged atmosphere. I didn't lock it. I didn't want her to know how terrified I was of her. I just stood there in the dark of my room, my forehead pressed against the cheap wood of the door, listening. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the faint buzz of the faulty ceiling fan I'd forgotten to turn off. It did nothing to stir the stagnant, soupy air. I listened for her footsteps, for the humming, for anything. Silence. My room was a sauna. Sweat dripped down my temples. My t-shirt was plastered to my skin. I peeled the blood-soaked fabric away from the wound in my side. It stung, a deep, angry ache that radiated through my ribs. I needed to clean it. I needed a first aid kit, which was in the bathroom. The bathroom was out there. With her. I stayed put, pressed against the door. 10 minutes passed. 20. My legs began to ache. The thirst was becoming unbearable, my throat dry and raspy. Every creak of the old building was the entity. Every distant siren was a sign. The world outside was still sane. A world I was no longer part of. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The thirst and the need to use the bathroom was a more immediate tyranny than the fear. I opened the door slowly, cautiously, trying not to make a sound. I peered into the short hallway that connected our bedrooms to the living room and bathroom. It was dark. Black. The living room light was off. Had she gone to bed? The thought sent a brief, idiotic wave of relief through me. Maybe she was just a weird girl caught in the same mess I was. Maybe I was losing my mind. I took a silent step into the hallway. The floorboard under my foot gave a loud creak. I froze, my muscles tensing up. I listened. Nothing. I took another step. My hand felt along the wall for the hallway light switch. My fingers brushed against the cool plastic plate. I flipped it up. Click. The single, naked bulb overhead flickered on, casting a harsh yellow light, and my soul flew away. She was there, standing at the other end of the hall, not 3 yards from me. She had been there the whole time, in the absolute dark, waiting, standing perfectly still. I didn't scream. The sound wouldn't come. A gasp was trapped in my throat. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. She didn't flinch at the sudden light. She didn't blink. She just stood there. A statue carved from shadows. Her presence was a void, sucking all the air and reason out of the space. Then, slowly, with an unnatural smoothness, she turned her head to look at me. Her face was a blank mask. Her eyes were dark pools, reflecting the bare bulb above me. There was nothing in them. No surprise, no fear, no recognition. My heart hammered against my sternum so hard I thought it would break. "What are you doing?" I managed to whisper, the words catching in my dry throat. "I couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice was monotone. She didn't seem to think there was anything strange about standing motionless in a pitch-black hallway in the middle of the night. I stared at her, my mind reeling, trying to process the sheer wrongness of the scene. Who does that? Who just stands in the dark like that? The terror I felt was no longer about a monster in a dream. It was about the flesh and blood person in front of me. The anchor. You can't do that," I stammered, taking a step back, my hand still on the wall. "You scared the hell out of me!" A flicker of something crossed her face. Was it confusion, or was it annoyance that I had found her? "I'll go to my room," she said, her voice still flat. She turned with that same eerie slowness and glided to her bedroom door, opened it, and disappeared inside, closing it softly behind her. I stood rooted to the spot, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I looked at her closed door, then at my own. The short stretch of hallway between them felt like a mile-wide chasm, a no man's land. Suddenly, the light above me flickered. Once, twice. I looked up at the bulb, my heart skipping a beat. It was probably just the ancient wiring in this dump. That's what I told myself. It's the heat, putting a strain on the grid. The light flickered again, more violently this time, buzzing with a sound like a trapped insect. It cast our shadows on the wall, long and distorted, dancing in a frantic, spastic rhythm. My shadow. Her closed door. The light buzzed one last time, a pathetic dying sound. Then it went out, plunging the hallway back into absolute blackness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My hand was still on the useless light switch. My other hand instinctively went to my side, to the wound. The living room was dark, too. I could just make out the faint rectangular shape of the window, illuminated by the sickly orange glow of the streetlights outside. The entire apartment had lost power. A deep, profound darkness settled over everything. It was a physical weight. The air, already thick with heat, now felt solid. It was the darkness of the dream corridors, a predator's darkness, and I was not alone in it. From behind her door, less than 10 feet away, I heard the soft click of her latch. My blood ran cold. She was opening her door. She was coming back out, into the dark with me. The click was as loud as a key turning in a lock. My blood froze. I stood rooted to the spot in the hallway, a statue made of sweat and fear. The blackness was total, a physical weight pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence. The sound had come from her door, the latch. She had been inside. Now, she was not. A faint creak followed, the sound of old wood groaning under a slow, deliberate weight. Her door was opening into the same impenetrable dark that held me. Reflexively, I took a step back, my bare foot landing silently on the grimy linoleum. My back pressed against the wall. My hand, slick with sweat, was still on the useless light switch. My heart was pounding, a frantic, muffled drum against my ribs. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Where was she? How far away? My eyes were wide open, straining, but saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was the blackness from the rusty corridors, the hunting ground. My mind went blank. All rational thought evaporated, replaced by a single, primal command. Light. I needed light. My other hand fumbled in my pocket, fingers trembling so badly I could barely close them around the hard rectangle of my phone. I pulled it out. My thumb slid across the screen, missing the icon for the flashlight twice before finally connecting. A brilliant white beam cut through the gloom, and my soul flew away. She was 10 feet away. No, less. She was standing in the middle of the hall, halfway between her door and me. She must have moved without making a sound. Her head was turned towards me, her face pale and emotionless in the harsh, direct light of the phone. She didn't so much as blink. Her eyes were just dark holes. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. A choked gasp escaped my lips. "The power went out," she stated. Her voice was a low monotone, devoid of any surprise or alarm, as if she was commenting on the weather. "I know the power went out," I whispered, the words ragged. My phone hand was shaking, making the beam of light tremble across her face. "What are you doing? Why did you come back out?" She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. The beam of my phone caught something in her hand, the small dark shape of that wooden doll. She was clutching it tightly. "We can't sleep," she said finally. "If we sleep, it comes back." "I know that," I hissed, the fear making me angry. It was a safer feeling than the pure terror. "I was in my room. You were in yours. That was the plan." "It's in the dark now," she said, taking a slow, gliding step towards me. I flinched, instinctively raising the phone higher, like a weapon. The light danced wildly. "Stay there. Don't come any closer." She stopped. Her expression didn't change. It was like talking to a machine. "We need to stay awake. Together. The fear keeps it sharp. When we're apart, we get tired." My head was spinning with a series of questions. What did she mean, keeps it sharp? Was she saying our fear was some kind of fuel? What is this? What the hell is going on? The logic was like trying to hold water in my fists. I was trapped in a blacked-out apartment with a woman who spoke in riddles and hummed a monster's tune, a woman who stood motionless in the dark. The thing outside was terrifying. The thing inside. I didn't know what she was. My throat was dry. A desperate thirst clawed at me. "I need some water." The words were an admission of weakness, a crack in the facade of anger. And I needed coffee. We both did. If we were going to survive until morning, we needed caffeine. A lot of it. "The stove is gas," she said, reading my mind. It sent a fresh shiver down my spine. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I kept the phone's light trained on her as I backed away, moving cautiously, step by step, towards the kitchen. She followed, a silent shadow trailing my light. The short walk felt like a mile. I was acutely aware of every sound, the scrape of my feet, the hum of the dead refrigerator, her soft, almost inaudible tread behind me. In the kitchen, I kept my back to the counter, facing her, the phone propped on a spice rack to illuminate the small space. It created a stark, isolated circle of light, throwing the rest of the apartment into even deeper shadow. We were on a stage. "Get the pot," I ordered, my voice tight. She complied without a word, moving with that unnerving grace to a cabinet, her movements economical and sure in the dim light. I found the coffee grounds and a box of matches. My hands were still shaking as I struck one. The flare of the sulfur was startlingly bright, the smell sharp and chemical. I turned the knob on the gas stove. With a soft whoosh, a circle of blue flames sprang to life, casting a flickering, demonic glow on our faces. It was the only other light in the world. She filled the pot from the tap and placed it on the burner, and then we waited. The silence returned, thicker this time, broken only by the hiss of the gas and the slow, gathering rumble of the water. I watched her. She was staring into the blue flames, her face unreadable. Her hand had relaxed slightly, and I could see the wooden fetish she held. It looked ancient, worn smooth by countless hands. It was vaguely humanoid, with a long torso and three-pronged shapes carved where the head and arms should be, like our wounds. My blood ran cold. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked up from the flames, her eyes seeming to focus on me for the first time. "It was a gift." "From who?" "From the one before," she said simply. Her voice was flat, but for a split second I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain? Memory? It was gone before I could be sure. The one before. Her last roommate. The one who disappeared. This is impossible. The thought hammered at me. It was a tangible object from this nightmare. A relay baton in a race I never signed up for. The water began to boil, its violent bubbling a welcome intrusion. I spooned coffee grounds into 2 mugs, the cheap dark powder smelling of earth and chemicals. Evelyn poured the scalding water. The steam rose between us, a momentary veil. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We were 2 soldiers in a trench, surviving 1 minute at a time. We took our mugs and retreated to the small dining table. I sat with my back to the wall, where I could see both the hallway and the front door. She took the seat opposite me. The phone's flashlight, placed in the middle of the table, was our campfire. It cast our shadows up onto the walls, long and distorted things that danced with every slight movement. The coffee was black, bitter, and scalding hot. I drank it anyway, welcoming the burn. It was a real sensation, a tether to the world I understood. For a while, it worked. The caffeine hit my system like a jolt of electricity, sharpening the edges of my fear, clearing some of the fog of exhaustion. We sat in silence. The only sounds were the sips from our mugs and the distant, lonely wail of a siren miles away. Time seemed to stop. An hour passed, maybe 2. The initial jolt of the coffee began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The heat in the apartment was relentless. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached to them. The pain in my side was a dull, constant throb. I watched Evelyn over the rim of my mug. She was perfectly still, her hands wrapped around her coffee. Her eyes were open, fixed on the phone's light, but they looked glassy, unfocused. Was she as tired as I was? Her unnatural stillness was its own kind of horror. It wasn't the stillness of relaxation, it was the stillness of a predator, or of prey, frozen in the headlights. I blinked, and the grain of the cheap wooden table swam before my eyes. I shook my head, hard. Don't sleep. You can't sleep. I forced myself to look around the room, to name objects to keep my mind active. Chair, table, window, shadow. My gaze drifted to the front door. It was locked, bolted. But what did that matter? The thing wasn't physical, not in a way we understood. It didn't need a door. It came through the skin, through the dream. My head slumped forward. I jerked it back up, my heart lurching. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I looked at Evelyn. She hadn't moved. She didn't seem to have noticed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice slurring slightly. "To stay awake." She slowly raised her head. "About what?" "Anything. Something normal. Where did you grow up?" I asked, the question feeling absurd. "Here and there," she replied, her voice a murmur. "A town with a big river. A city with a broken bridge." Her answers were smoke. They gave nothing to hold on to. The effort of talking was immense. The heat, the darkness, the unending tension. They were a powerful sedative. My mind was slipping its moorings. The edges of the phone's light seemed to fuzz and blur. The shadows on the wall grew longer, deeper. I focused on the table again, on the wood grain. The lines twisted and writhed, looking like the corridors from the dream. I squeezed my eyes shut for just a second, just to clear them. 1 second. That's all it took. It wasn't a drift into sleep. It was a fall. A sudden bottomless drop into a void of rust and tearing canvas. I saw a long limb, jointed all wrong, swing through the red-tinged dark. I felt a weight, crushing and absolute, pinning me down. Then, a sharp, incandescent line of pain was drawn down my forearm. I was back. A cry was torn from my throat, a raw, animal sound of shock and agony. I lurched back in my chair, clutching my left arm. The coffee mug crashed to the floor, shattering. Across the table, in the exact same instant, Evelyn cried out too. It wasn't a scream. It was a sharp, indrawn hiss of pain, like a snake's. She had dropped her own mug and was grabbing her own left arm in the exact same spot. My breath hitched. My heart hammered. In the stark, unwavering beam of the phone's light, I slowly, deliberately pulled my hand away from my arm. The skin was torn open. 3 parallel gouges, deep and bloody, ran from my wrist halfway to my elbow. They were clean, precise cuts, not ragged tears. They looked deliberate. Fresh blood, dark in the artificial light, welled up and began to drip onto the table. My eyes shot up to meet hers. Her face, for the first time, was not a mask. It was twisted in a grimace of pain. Her eyes were wide, fixed on my arm. Then her gaze dropped to her own. "Show me," I whispered. The words were stones in my dry throat. With a slow, pained movement, she turned her arm over into the light. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was an utter absurdity. There, on her pale skin, was the wound. Not a similar wound. Not a wound that looked like mine. It was my wound. The exact same length, the same depth, the same spacing between the 3 gouges. It was a perfect bloody carbon copy. "This is impossible," I breathed. My mind buckled under the weight of it. We had shared a dream. Now we shared a wound. Now we had dipped into the nightmare for a single, shared second, and it had marked us again. Together. The pain was real. The blood was real. It was dripping from my arm onto the floor, thick, warm drops. But then I watched her, and the terror inside me found a new, lower depth. The grimace of pain on her face was fading. It smoothed out, replaced by something else. Her breathing evened. She leaned forward, bringing her wounded arm closer to the light. Her expression wasn't one of fear, or of pain, or of panic. It was curiosity. With a clinical detachment, she used the long index finger of her good hand to touch the edge of the deepest gouge. She traced it, from one end to the other, her touch light, exploratory. She wasn't wincing. She was examining the injury as a scientist would examine a specimen. She poked gently at the raw, weeping flesh inside the cut. A low hiss escaped her lips, but it wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of something else. Interest. Awe. She looked up at me, her eyes dark and fathomless in the phone's glare. The blank mask was back, but it felt different now. Colder. More alien. "It's deeper this time," she said, her voice a whispery monotone. "It's learning." The words hung in the air between us, thicker than the heat, more solid than the trembling beam of light from my phone. "It's learning." My head spun. "Learning?" The word came out as a dry rasp. "What is that supposed to mean? What is it?" My gaze was locked on her, on the unnerving calm that had resettled on her features. The pain was gone. The curiosity was gone. All that was left was a blank, porcelain stillness. She pulled her arm back from the light, cradling it gently against her stomach. Her eyes were fixed on the deep scratches on my own arm, the blood still welling, a dark ruby color under the phone's white glare. One drop hit the table with a soft pat, a sound that seemed to echo in the dead silence of the kitchen. "It learns how to make a better connection," she said. Her voice was a murmur, barely audible over the low hiss of the gas flame on the stove. "The first marks are a test, a greeting. These are an anchor." My mind refused to process it. This is impossible. It was a dream, a nightmare. But the blood was real. The pain was a fire licking up my arm, and the woman sitting across from me was speaking of it like it was a science. I shook my head, a frantic, jerky motion. "An anchor for what? What are you talking about? You're not making any sense." I stood up so fast my chair scraped violently against the floor, the sound ripping through the apartment. I started pacing the small circle of light, a caged animal. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could feel the cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Just tell me what's happening," I demanded. My voice was rising, cracking with a terror I couldn't contain. "You know something. You have to. That doll. This dream." She didn't look up at me. Instead, she traced the grain of the cheap wooden table with a single, long finger, as if reading a map only she could see. "I've had this dream before," she said, her voice still that same flat monotone. I froze mid-stride. My blood went cold. "What?" "Not this exact one," she continued, her finger never stopping its slow journey across the wood. "The hallways are always the same color. The sound is always the same. But the chase is different. The wounds are different." My throat was dry. 1,000 questions stormed my brain. When? Who? Her finger stopped. She finally lifted her head, and her dark, hollow eyes met mine. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in them. A ghost of a memory. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. With the one before, she said. The one before. The words hit me like a physical blow. Her last roommate. The one who disappeared. I stood rooted to the spot, a statue of disbelief. So, who? Who was she? Was she a victim, or was she the carrier? What is this? A curse passed from one person to the next. What happened to him? I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. She looked away, down at the wooden fetish that was now resting on the table beside her mug. It got too deep. The anchor held. He couldn't wake up one morning. She paused, and the silence stretched, heavy and final. I found the room empty. This was on his pillow. She nudged the small wooden doll with her finger. My mind went blank. Empty. The room was empty. He was gone. Just gone. And she was here. With me. The next one in line. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back and leaned against the grimy kitchen counter, my legs threatening to give out. My wounded arm throbbed in time with my pulse. No, this wasn't happening. There had to be a way out. An idea, so simple and so desperate, cut through the fog of terror. The phone. It was still on the table, its light a lonely beacon. The world outside still existed. Police, ambulances, people who lived in a reality where wounds didn't teleport from dreams. They had to exist. All I had to do was reach them. Without a moment's hesitation, I lunged for the phone. My hand closed around it. My thumb, slick with a mixture of sweat and my own blood, swiped across the screen. I stabbed at the green call icon, then at the keypad. 9. 1. 1. My finger hovered over the final call button. Hope. Sharp and painful, surged through me. This would end it. A voice on the other end. Sirens. They would come. They would break down the door if they had to. They would flood this dark, haunted space with light and reason. I pressed the button. I lifted the phone to my ear, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I listened, waiting for the ring, the calm, professional voice of a dispatcher. But there was no ring. There was only silence. A dead, heavy silence that pressed into my ear. I pulled the phone away, looked at the screen. It said, dialing, but nothing was happening. Come on, I muttered, my voice tight. Come on, damn it. I put it back to my ear, and then I heard it. It started faintly, a low, staticky roughness on the line. I strained to hear, my muscles tensed. What is that? And then the static began to resolve itself into a texture, a sound I knew with every fiber of my being, the sound of tearing canvas. It was distant at first, like hearing it from down one of the dream's rust-colored hallways. But it was growing. My blood froze. It was coming through the phone. It was in the phone. The tearing, ripping sound grew louder, more defined, filling my ear. Reep! It was shredding the silence, shredding my hope. Louder now. It was as if the thing was on the other end of the line, its mouth pressed against the receiver, breathing its own terrible voice directly into my brain. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. A choked sound escaped me. I snatched the phone away from my head as if it were red hot, my finger frantically stabbing at the screen to end the call. The sound stopped. Silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavier. It was listening. I stared at the phone in my hand, this small rectangle of glass and plastic that was supposed to be my link to the world. It had been compromised. It had been turned into another doorway for the nightmare. I couldn't believe my eyes. The screen was black, lifeless. "It's no use." Evelyn's voice came from the table. "The outside can't get in, not while it's here." I slammed the dead phone down on the counter. The plastic clattered loudly. "What do we do?" I yelled, the terror boiling over into rage. "What the hell do we do? Just sit here and wait for it to carve us up piece by piece?" She didn't answer. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over to the cabinet where we kept the salt. She took down the canister, then went to the sink and filled a small bowl with tap water. She brought them back to the table, setting them down in the flickering blue light of the stove. What is she doing? My mind was spinning with questions. She dipped her fingers into the salt canister and sprinkled a generous amount into the water. She stirred it with her index finger, the salt grating against the ceramic. Then she picked up a dish rag from the sink. She sat back down. She dipped the corner of the rag into the saltwater solution, and then she began to clean her wound. The moment the salty rag touched the raw, open flesh of her arm, she let out a sharp, indrawn hiss through her clenched teeth. Her whole body went rigid. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table with her good hand. But she didn't stop. She pressed down, dragging the rough, stinging cloth through the bloody gouges on her arm. Methodically, purposely, cleaning out the blood, wiping the torn edges of her skin. The sound of her sharp, pained breaths filled the kitchen. I stared, stunned. "What are you doing? That has to hurt like hell." She paused, taking a shuddering breath, her eyes squeezed shut. "It does," she breathed. She opened her eyes, which were watering from the pain, and looked at me. "But it's necessary." "Necessary for what?" She dipped the rag in the salt water again. She gritted her teeth, readying for another pass. Her whisper was chillingly calm. "It prefers it clean." The statement landed in my gut like a block of ice. It prefers it clean. The words echoed in my head, nonsensical and horrifying. It wasn't a medical procedure. It was a ritual, an act of preparation. She wasn't cleaning the wound for herself. She was cleaning it for the thing that made it. My skin crawled. Goosebumps erupted on my arms. I backed away from her, a new, specific kind of dread taking hold. She wasn't just a fellow victim. She was an acolyte. She understood the rules of this twisted game, rules I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Who is behind all this? Is it her? Is she inviting it? My gaze darted around our small, illuminated stage. The kitchen, the table, the two of us bleeding in the dark. It felt like a prison cell. My eyes went to the window over the sink. It looked out into the blackness of the night, a sheer drop 3 stories down to the alley. There was nothing out there but air. The streetlights from the main road cast a faint, sickly orange glow against the side of the building, but it didn't reach our window. It was just a black square. But it was a connection to the outside, a reminder that there was a world beyond these walls. I needed that reminder. I walked over to it, my bare feet sticking to the grimy floor. I needed to see something other than her and the blood and the flickering gaslight. I put my hands on the counter on either side of the sink and leaned forward, peering out. All I could see was my own reflection, a pale, haunted ghost staring back at me from the glass. Beyond it, just darkness. The apartment felt hot, sealed. I imagined the cool night air outside, and then I saw it. It wasn't a reflection. For a split second, my brain didn't register it. It was just movement in the periphery of the black square. A flicker. But it was impossible. We were on the 3rd floor. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I stared, unblinking, into the darkness outside the window. A shape slid past. It was tall, impossibly tall, blotting out the faint orange glow from the distant street. It moved with a smooth, unnatural grace. It wasn't climbing. It was just passing by. I caught a glimpse of a long, thin limb, jointed in a way that made my stomach clench. It bent at an angle that wasn't human, a sharp, insect-like pivot. The shadow it cast was long and disjointed, a thing of sticks and nightmare angles. It moved past the window and was gone. I stood completely still. My whole body was frozen. Time seemed to stop. Did I see that? Was that real? It couldn't be. It had to be a trick of the light, a product of my exhausted, terrified mind. But I knew it wasn't. It was out there. It wasn't just in the dream anymore. It wasn't on the phone line. It was physically out there, crawling on the walls of our building, 3 stories up, defying gravity, defying reason. It was right outside. My soul flew away. I took a stumbling step back from the window, my hand flying up to cover my mouth, stifling a scream. My eyes were wide, locked on the black square of glass. I turned to look at Evelyn. She had finished her gruesome task. The rag lay beside the bowl of pinkish water. Her wound was raw and red, but clean. She was watching me. She hadn't been looking at the window, but she had seen the terror on my face. She knew. Her expression was unreadable. Her face was a mask. "It's here," I breathed, the words stolen from my lungs. "It's outside." Evelyn nodded slowly. There was no surprise in her eyes, no new fear, only a deep, ancient weariness. She picked up the small wooden fetish from the table, her fingers closing around it until her knuckles were white. "It's time," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost inaudible. "It's found purchase." My blood froze. Her words didn't just hang in the air, they drilled into me, cold and sharp. It's found purchase. Purchase. A foothold. It wasn't just a shadow on the wall anymore. It was here, anchored to this place. To us. I stood rooted to the spot, my back to the black window facing her. The kitchen felt like it had shrunk, the walls closing in until it was just this small, terrible stage lit by the blue ghost light of the stove. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom, her eyes 2 dark pools. The polished wooden doll in her hand seemed to watch me, its carved, featureless face holding an eternity of malice. "What do you mean?" The question was a puff of air. My lungs felt tight, as if an invisible hand was squeezing them. "What does that mean? It's found purchase?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her knuckles bone white around the fetish. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hiss of the gas and the frantic hammering beat of my own heart. I could feel the blood thrumming in my wounds, a hot, painful pulse that matched the rhythm of my terror. Then she moved. It was not a sudden lunge. It was a slow, deliberate motion. She placed the wooden doll carefully on the table, setting it upright. It stood there, a tiny, dark sentinel. She pushed her chair back, the legs groaning against the linoleum. She walked past the table, her bare feet making no sound, and went to the knife block on the counter. My muscles tensed. My eyes were locked on her. What is she doing? My mind spun with a storm of questions. Who is behind all this? Is it her? Her hand, long and pale, reached out and closed around the handle of the largest chef's knife. She drew it from the block with a soft shing of steel. The blade caught the blue light, a sliver of cold fire in the darkness. For a heartbeat, I was sure she was coming for me. This was it, the final act. She was the monster, the priestess, and she was here to finish the sacrifice. Reflexively, I took a step back, my hand coming up as if to ward off a blow. My back pressed against the wall. But she didn't turn towards me. She turned the knife in her hand, gripping the handle tightly. She held her left arm out, the arm with the 3 clean, raw gouges. Her eyes were fixed on the wound, her expression one of intense, terrifying focus. I couldn't believe my eyes. Time seemed to stop. "Evelyn," I said, the name catching in my dry throat. "What are you doing?" She ignored me. She lowered the point of the knife to her own skin, just above the angry red marks. "No," I breathed. My mind went blank. This is impossible. Without a moment's hesitation, she dragged the point of the blade downwards. It wasn't a cut. It was a gouge. She was trying to dig the wound out. She pressed hard, her jaw clenched, a low grunt of effort and agony escaping her lips. Skin parted. Fresh blood, darker than before, welled up instantly, spilling over the clean edges of the original injury. A strangled noise tore from my throat. I lunged forward. I didn't think. It was pure instinct, a desperate animal need to stop the horror unfolding in front of me. "Stop it!" I grabbed for her wrist, the one holding the knife. Her skin was freezing cold, shockingly so, but her grip on the knife was like iron. She fought me, her strength unnatural. She twisted, trying to bring the knife back to her arm, her eyes wild. "Let go!" she hissed, her voice a raw sound I'd never heard before. "It has to come off!" We stumbled together in a grotesque dance, our feet slipping on the grimy floor. I wrestled with her arm, my fingers straining to break her grip. The knife waved precariously between us. She shoved me, and I slammed back against the edge of the kitchen table, the corner digging into my spine. My own wound screamed in protest. A bolt of white-hot fire shot up my arm through my side. The pain was so intense it made my vision flash. And at that exact same moment, she cried out. It was a sharp, piercing shriek of pure agony. Her body went rigid. Her grip on the knife slackened for just a second. We both looked down. Our wounded arms were touching. My bloody gashes were pressed against hers. Where our skin met, it felt like being branded with a hot iron. The pain was shared, a circuit of agony completed between us. We staggered apart, breaking the contact. The searing pain subsided to a deep, throbbing ache. We both fell. Our legs gave out from the shock and the pain, and we collapsed onto the hard linoleum floor in a heap of tangled limbs. The knife clattered out of her grasp, spinning across the floor and coming to rest a few feet away. We lay there, gasping for air. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the steady, indifferent hiss of the stove. I was on my side, my cheek pressed to the cool, sticky floor. I could taste dust and something metallic. My blood. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. Evelyn was a few feet away, curled into a ball, cradling her mutilated arm. She was weeping. Not loudly, but in small, broken sobs that were somehow more terrible than her silence. My rage was gone. replaced by a hollow, ringing dread. I looked at her, this broken girl on my kitchen floor, and then at the knife glinting nearby. What the hell is going on? She wasn't trying to kill me. She was trying to mutilate herself, to cut out the mark, as if it were a parasite she could excise with a blade. Slowly, shakily, she uncurled. Her sobbing subsided. She pushed her lank hair out of her face. Her eyes, red-rimmed and full of a terrifying emptiness, found the knife. My heart skipped a beat. I started to move, to kick it away, but she was faster. She didn't lunge for it. She crawled. Moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, she crept across the floor like a wounded animal. Her fingers closed around the handle. I froze, ready to spring, to fight her again. But she didn't raise it. She didn't look at her arm. She stayed on her hands and knees, the knife held tight in her fist, and looked at the floorboards between us. Then she began to carve. The tip of the blade bit into the old worn wood of the floor. The sound was nails on a chalkboard, a high scraping shriek that set my teeth on edge. Scrappy! Scrappy! She carved with a steady, determined hand. A straight line, then another, branching off from the first, and a third, parallel to the second. Goosebumps erupted all over my skin. I knew that shape. I knew it with a certainty that went bone deep. She was carving the mark, the same three-pronged symbol that was torn into our flesh. She finished the last line and sat back on her heels, breathing heavily. She looked at the symbol etched into the floor, raw wood showing through the dark, grimy varnish. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" She lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears and blood. "Protection," she breathed. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "It marks the space. It tells the thing. This place is already claimed. It might confuse it." Confuse it? The words echoed in my head. It was an utter absurdity. A folk magic ward against a thing that crawled on third-story walls and bled through from nightmares. But I looked at her, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and for a second, I almost believed her. Then I looked at the symbol again. Protection? It didn't feel like protection. It felt like a signature, like a brand. It was the entity's mark, now carved into the very bones of my apartment. She hadn't put up a shield. She had signed a contract. She had invited it in. Something inside me snapped. The last fragile thread of trust, of seeing her as a fellow victim, just broke. She knew the rules. She was cleaning the wounds for it. She was marking the floor for it. Whether she was a willing servant or a terrified pawn, it didn't matter. She was a conduit. The nightmare flowed through her. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. I backed away from her, away from the symbol on the floor. My eyes darted around the kitchen, the blue flame, the fetish on the table, the blood. This whole room was its altar, and she was its priestess. I had to get out. I had to get away from her. I turned and bolted from the kitchen. My bare feet slapped against the floor as I ran down the short, dark hallway. My room. I just had to get to my room. I burst through the doorway and slammed the door shut behind me. The click of the latch felt flimsy, inadequate. I fumbled for the lock and turned it. It offered no comfort. My eyes scanned the room, looking for something, anything. The dresser. It was heavy, made of cheap, solid particle board. It was my only option. A new surge of adrenaline hit me. I grabbed the sides of the dresser. My wounded arm screamed in protest, a blinding, searing fire, but I ignored it. I put my back into it, my feet slipping on the dusty floor. The dresser groaned. It scraped across the floorboards in a series of agonizing jerks. It was heavier than I thought. My muscles strained, my teeth gritted. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Finally, I got it wedged against the door. It wasn't perfect, but no one was getting through without a hell of a lot of noise and effort. I stumbled back and collapsed onto my bed, my chest heaving. My body was a road map of pain. My side, my arm, my back, my exhausted muscles. I was trapped. I had barricaded myself in. Safe. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Then I heard it. It started from the other side of the door, from the hallway, a sound so simple, so innocent. She was humming. It was the same discordant, tuneless melody from her character bio, the one she hummed when she thought I wasn't listening. A simple, looping, unsettling tune. The sound from the dream. My blood ran cold. The relief vanished, replaced by a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight. She was out there, in the dark, on the other side of the door, and she was humming its song. The barrier I had built felt useless. The sound seeped through the wood, through the cracks, filling my small room, filling my head. It wasn't a sound of comfort. It was a call, a beacon in the dark, and I had just locked myself in a box with the silence, forced to listen to it. The humming seeped through the wood. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a song. It was a thread of sound, thin and sharp, and it stitched itself directly into my brain. The melody was simple, a discordant loop of 3 or 4 notes that went nowhere and resolved nothing. It was the sound of a broken music box, the sound of a child's game gone sour, the sound from the dream. I was on the floor, my back against the bed frame, my legs sprawled out. My chest was a tight drum, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every muscle was locked. My eyes were fixed on the door, on the heavy dresser I had wedged against it. It was a pathetic fortress. The sound came through it as if it were made of paper. Dee-dum-dum. Goosebumps erupted all over my skin. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't work. The sound wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside my head, a vibration in my bones, echoing in the hollow spaces behind my eyes. She was out there, in the hall, humming its tune. A welcome, a lullaby. I scrambled to my feet, my wounded arms screaming a protest of fire. I ignored it. I paced the small rectangle of my room. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The floorboards creaked under my bare feet. The moonlight streaming through the window sliced the room in 2, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed with every step I took. The humming continued, a steady, indifferent pulse in the dark. It was the rhythm of this new, terrible world. What is she doing? What is this all about? The questions spun in my head, a vortex of fear. She carves a sigil on the floor for protection, then hums the monster's song. The actions didn't line up. They were a language I couldn't understand, and every syllable was a threat. I had to do something. I couldn't just stay in here, a rat in a box, listening to the soundtrack of my own undoing. I moved toward the door, my movements jerky, robotic. I pressed my ear against the solid wood of the dresser, then the door itself. The humming was louder here, clearer. I could hear her breath between the loops, a soft, wet sound. She was close, right on the other side. I held my breath, listening. And then it came. Crack! The sound was not the humming. It was not her. It was from the front of the apartment. A sound so loud, so violent, it was like the building itself had broken a bone. My heart leaped into my throat. The humming stopped. Dead silence rushed in to fill the space, and it was 1,000 times worse. I stayed frozen, my ear still pressed to the door. What was that? A beat of silence. 2. 3. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. Then a new sound began, a low, deep groaning. It was the sound of old wood under immense, slow pressure. It was the front door. I knew it. I pictured it in my mind. The cheap wood, the 3 locks I had, bolted myself. The groaning grew louder, punctuated by the high-pitched shriek of nails being pulled from their moorings. It was a long, drawn-out sound of torture. Wood fibers tearing, the frame straining. This is impossible. We were on the 3rd floor. The hallway outside was empty. I'd seen it. There was nothing out there. Nothing that could exert that kind of force. A series of sharp, splintering snaps echoed down the hall. The groaning intensified, rising in pitch to a scream of tortured lumber. It sounded like a giant was leaning its full weight against our door, patiently, methodically, pushing it inward. My mind went blank. I stumbled back from my own door, away from the sounds. I stared at the dresser, my useless barricade, as if the thing in the hall could press through my door next. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I backed away until my legs hit the edge of my bed and I sat down hard. The sounds from the hall reached a crescendo. A final, deafening bang, like a battering ram striking home. The groaning stopped. The splintering stopped. Silence. A deeper silence than before. A heavy, listening silence. It felt expectant. My eyes were glued to my bedroom door. I waited for footsteps, for her to scream, for the sound of that thing tearing through the apartment. But there was nothing. Just the low hum of the city outside my window and the frantic pounding of my own heart. A minute passed. An eternity. Then, a voice. Jake? It was her, Evelyn. Her voice was a low whisper, barely audible through the thick wood of the door. It was not the voice of someone screaming in terror. It was something else. Something strained and urgent. I didn't answer. My throat was dry. I couldn't make a sound. Jake, are you in there? The whisper came again, closer this time, as if she had her mouth right against the wood. It's inside. My blood froze. The words hit me like stones. Inside. The door held, she whispered, her voice cracking, so low I had to strain to hear it. The locks held, but it's here. It left a mark. I still couldn't speak. I could only listen, my body rigid. On the inside of the door, Jake. Her voice was laced with a chilling awe. There's a handprint. On our side of the door, the wood is scorched around it, and the fingers, they're too long. I squeezed my eyes shut. I saw it instantly. A fresh, bloody handprint burned into the wood. Fingers like spiders. A brand. A claim. It hadn't needed to break the door down. It was already in here with us. What is it? I finally managed to force the words out. They came out as a raw croak, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. There was a long pause from the other side. I could hear her breathing, shaky and shallow. It doesn't have a name, she finally whispered. It's a condition. A relationship. It's a symbiote. The word hung in the air between us, separated by a thin layer of wood. Symbiote. It was a clinical biological term. It made no sense. It made perfect sense. It eats, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, forcing me to creep forward again, to press my ear back to the door to catch her words. It eats fear, but it can't eat just one person's fear. That's not enough. It needs more. It needs a circuit. I listened, my mind racing, trying to piece it together. The dream, the wounds, the shared pain. A circuit. It finds someone, she said, her voice trembling. Someone who is open to it. It marks them. That's the anchor. She paused. I knew what she was going to say next. Her. She was the anchor. Then it waits, she breathed. It waits until the anchor is close to someone else, in the same space, sharing the same air. Then it tethers. It builds a bridge. Between the two of us, Jake. It links us. Her words were a key, unlocking the horror of the last few hours. The shared dream wasn't an accident. It was a hunting ground, a private arena built for two. It feeds on the feedback loop, she explained, the words tumbling out now, desperate. Your terror makes me more afraid. My pain makes your pain worse. It gets stronger and stronger, feeding on both of us at once. That's why the wounds, they have to be the same. It keeps the connection pure. I thought of her cleaning the gashes with salt water. It prefers it clean. I thought of her trying to carve the mark from her own arm, a desperate attempt to break the circuit. I thought of the symbol she'd carved into the floor. It marks the space. It tells the thing. This place is already claimed. What the hell is going on? Was she trying to protect us? Or was she just following a different set of rules for a game I was only beginning to understand? The dream is the feeding ground, her whisper continued, relentless. But when the fear gets strong enough, when it gets to a peak, it can manifest here, in the real world. That's what just happened at the door. It's testing the boundaries. It's getting ready to cross over for good. I pulled back from the door, a wave of nausea washing over me. The room felt like it was tilting. She wasn't just a victim. She was a rule book, a carrier, a plague vector. And she had brought this thing into my home, into my skin. Why me? I asked, the question torn from my lungs. Why did you pick me? I didn't pick you. Her voice rose for the first time, a sharp, ragged spike of anguish. I didn't pick anyone. I just ran. My last roommate, David. She choked on the name. A wet, ragged sob came through the door. I ran. I thought if I got far enough away, found a new place, maybe it would lose the scent. But it's attached to me. It just needed a new tether. A new tether. That's all I was. An electrical component, a second battery to complete the circuit. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. David, the roommate who disappeared. He didn't just disappear. What happens now? I asked, my voice flat. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing yet. It stretched for a full minute. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. The city hummed on, oblivious. Finally, her voice returned, a ghost of a whisper. So quiet, I almost missed it. It takes one of us. I stood rooted to the spot. That's the only way to end the loop for the night, she breathed. It feeds, and then it rests. And the one who is left, the anchor. They get to survive. They get to run until it gets hungry again. Her words laid out the choice with brutal simplicity. It wasn't us against it. It was me against her. A zero-sum game. One lives, one dies. And she had played this game before. She survived. David didn't. My mind reeled. Was this the truth? Or was this the final move in the game? A perfectly crafted story to make me drop my guard, to make me feel pity for her, to convince me to open the door, to make me the sacrifice so she could run again? The mark I carved on the floor, she whispered. It's a way to declare a space, to offer a choice. It confuses the thing. It has to choose which territory to claim fully. I looked down at my own feet, at the floorboards of my bedroom. My territory. The dresser was pushed against the door. I had barricaded myself in. I had claimed my space. And she was out there in the rest of the apartment, with the symbol, with the handprint on the door. Had I trapped myself? Or had I trapped her? The humming did not return. The sounds from the front door did not return. Her sobbing stopped. There was only the vast, crushing pressure of the silence. She was out there, waiting. And the thing was in here with us, somewhere in the apartment, in the shadows between our rooms, waiting. My eyes darted around my small room, the window, the dresser, the bed. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage. Or maybe it was an arena, and the fight had already begun. I just had to figure out who my real opponent was. Her, or the thing that wore our skin. I stood in the center of the room, every muscle screaming, every nerve frayed raw, trapped in an impossible choice, listening to the silence grow teeth. The silence was a physical thing. It had weight. It pressed in on the thin wood of the door, seeped through the cracks around the frame. It was heavier than the dresser I had wedged there. My own breathing was an intrusion, a ragged counterpoint to the absolute stillness on the other side. My mind was a frantic machine, replaying her words on a loop. It takes one of us. Was this the truth? Or was it a story? A weaponized narrative designed to make me the perfect victim? She survived David. She knew the rules. I was the novice in a game where the price of learning was everything. The new tether. A disposable part. My eyes scanned the room, the cheap furniture, the single window looking out onto the dead air of the city night. I had barricaded myself in. I had claimed my space just as she'd said. I had locked myself in a cage, waiting for the tiger. But had I locked it out? Or had I locked myself in with its accomplice? The questions spun and spun. What the hell is going on? My ear was still against the wood. I listened for a footstep, a breath, the sound of her moving away. I heard nothing. Only the low thrum of my own terror. She was out there, waiting for me to make a mistake, for me to panic, for me to open the door. Or was she waiting for it? The first sound was not a sound. It was a vibration. It came up through the floorboards, a low, resonant thrum that I felt in the bones of my feet. It was not the city. It was not the building settling. It was a hum, deep and organic, like a colossal insect stirring in the foundations of the world. The vibration grew, making the loose change on my dresser buzz faintly. Then came the scratch. It was on my door, on my side of the dresser. A slow, deliberate scrape of something hard and sharp being dragged across the wood. My blood froze. I jerked back from the door, stumbling over my own feet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I stared at the dresser, at the door hidden behind it. Scrape. Drag. Scrape. The sound was methodical, patient. It was exploring the surface, testing the grain. It wasn't trying to break in. It was signing its name. Goosebumps erupted over my entire body. I backed away, my back pressing against the cool plaster of the far wall. The scratching stopped. The heavy dresser shuddered. It moved an inch, the legs groaning against the floorboards. This is impossible. It was solid oak, heavy as a tombstone. I had struggled to get it into place. It moved again, scraping a harsh line in the floor. A deep groaning noise came from outside the door, but it wasn't wood this time. It was a low, guttural sound, like a throat being cleared of gravel and earth. The dresser lurched forward a foot. A gap appeared between it and the door, a slice of hallway darkness. Reflexively, I grabbed the only thing I could reach, the heavy glass paperweight from my desk. It felt small and useless in my hand. My muscles were locked tight. The dresser slid another few feet, pushed from the other side by a force I couldn't comprehend. The door was now half exposed, and then I saw it. The wood of the door was buckling inward, splintering, not from a single point of impact, but from a distributed pressure, as if something huge and soft was leaning against it. The wood fibers tore with a sound like ripping sinew. A sound started in the hallway beyond. The humming, her humming, that broken, looping melody. It wasn't a lullaby now. It was a fanfare, an announcement. With a final explosive crack, the door frame shattered. The door flew inward, not off its hinges, but simply broken in two, ripped apart. The dresser toppled onto its side with a deafening crash. The room was open, and the thing poured in. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was a cascade of shadows, a disruption in the air. The light from the window seemed to bend around it, refusing to touch it. I got an impression of immense height, a silhouette that scraped the ceiling, of limbs that bent at nauseating angles. It folded itself to fit through the doorway, a fluid nightmare of impossible geometry. The sound hit me next, the sound from the dream, the sound of tearing canvas. But it wasn't a sound in the air. It was a sound inside my skull, vibrating through my teeth, a physical violation. It was the sound of reality being ripped at the seams. I stood rooted to the spot, the paperweight a cold stone in my palm. My mind went blank. I couldn't scream. My throat was dry. The lights in the room flickered once, twice, and died. I was plunged into darkness, lit only by the weak orange glow of the streetlights below. In the strobing effect of the failing bulb, I saw a shape move. A long, jointed arm, thin as a branch, unfolded from the central mass of shadow. It reached out, its fingers, too many of them, scraping against the ceiling. My back was flush against the wall. There was nowhere to run. I hurled the paperweight. It flew through the space where the shadow was densest and smashed against the wall behind it with a pathetic pop. The thing didn't flinch. It didn't seem to notice. It took a step into the room, a skittering, clicking sound on the floorboards. The tearing canvas noise rose in pitch. I could smell it now. Ozone. Blood. The smell of the rusty hallways. My eyes darted to the ruined doorway. I was expecting to see her cowering or screaming or gone. She was there, standing perfectly still in the hall. Her face was a pale oval in the gloom. She wasn't scared. She was watching. Her head was tilted with a sort of clinical curiosity, and she was humming. The sound was quiet, almost devotional, a horrifying counterpoint to the tearing shriek filling my head. The shadow thing turned its attention to me. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel its focus, a crushing mental weight. It was the feeling from the dream, the feeling of being pinned, of being seen by something that did not have eyes. It moved toward me, its form shifting and contracting. A wave of force hit me, pushing the air from my lungs. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out. The floor was cold beneath my hands. The entity loomed over me, a column of absolute blackness that blotted out the window. A limb descended. Not fast. It lowered itself with a slow, deliberate grace. It was three-pronged at the end, like a claw or a root. It was the thing that had given me the wounds. It reached for my leg. "No!" I gasped, the word a useless puff of air. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping on the splintered wood of the floor, but I was already cornered. The claw touched my jeans. I felt no pain, just an unnatural cold that seemed to leach the warmth from my flesh, from my bones. Then the light flickered again. A single, brilliant flash before total death. In that half-second of illumination, I saw her. Evelyn. She had stepped into the doorway. But it wasn't her. Her face was gaunt, stretched thin over her skull. Her skin was like old parchment. Her eyes were gone. In their place were two hollow black sockets. They were pits of shadow, ancient and empty. It was a face from a tomb, a face that had been worn for 1,000 years. She was smiling, a thin, lipless line. The light died. The image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. That was her. The anchor. The host. The real face under the mask. The weight crashed down. It was a physical thing now, an impossible pressure on my chest, my limbs, my head. It was the weight of a fallen building. I couldn't breathe. My ribs felt like they were about to splinter. The tearing canvas noise was deafening, a storm inside my brain. I was being crushed. I was being unmade. The cold from the claw on my leg spread, a tide of ice water flowing through my veins. I looked down. The scratches on my arm, the gouges on my side. They weren't bleeding red anymore. A thin, black, oily fluid wept from the wounds, glistening in the faint moonlight. It was the creature's blood. Or it was my blood, changed. It was our blood. A final searing pain erupted in my chest. It wasn't a cut or a stab. It was a feeling of being hollowed out from the inside. A fire that burned away everything, leaving only a shell. It was the pain of the tether being pulled taut, and then snapping. I felt a silent scream tear through me, a soundless explosion in my bones. The crushing weight intensified. The tearing sound consumed all thought. The shadow poured over me, into me. The last thing I saw was the darkness folding in, a black curtain falling. Everything went away. The sound, the pressure, the pain, everything. Sunlight. That was the first thing. A warm, heavy bar of it, cutting across the floor. It was thick with dancing dust motes. It smelled like summer morning. My cheek was pressed against the rough grain of the floorboards. Wood splinters. My head throbbed with a low, dull rhythm. I was alive. My eyes cracked open. The light was harsh. I blinked, my vision swimming. My body was a map of aches, a deep soreness in my joints as if I'd been crushed. The memories stormed back in a chaotic flood. The splintering door, the shadow pouring into the room, the tearing sound in my skull, the weight, the final, searing pain in my chest. I pushed myself up with a groan. My hands were scraped raw, the skin broken. I looked at them. Dried blood was caked under my fingernails. My own. Yes, that felt right. I remembered clawing at the floor. My eyes scanned the room. My mind went blank. The dresser was upright. It stood exactly where it had been yesterday morning, flush against the wall. The heavy glass paperweight sat on my desk, catching the morning light in its facets. There was no toppled furniture, no wreckage. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. I stumbled toward the door. I reached out a trembling hand, expecting to find shattered wood, a ruined frame. My fingers met a smooth, solid surface. The door was whole. The paint was unmarred. The frame was intact. This is impossible. I stood rooted to the spot. My heart started a frantic, heavy beat against my ribs, a drum signaling a terrible charge. I put my ear to the wood. Silence. Not the loaded, watchful silence from last night. Just the empty morning silence of a vacant apartment. I turned the knob. It clicked softly. The door swung open. The hallway was empty. Clean. The floorboards were unstained. I looked back into my room. I looked at the wall where I had hurled the paperweight. There was no mark. No chip in the plaster. I ran my hand over the door again. Smooth. Solid. Perfect. What the hell is going on? My breath came in ragged bursts. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I looked down at myself. My shirt was torn at the collar. My jeans were dirty. The evidence of a struggle was on my body, but not in the room. It was like the world had been reset, but had forgotten to include me in the cleanup. The wounds. Reflexively, I pulled up the hem of my shirt. I looked at my side where the 3 gouges had been weeping that black fluid. Nothing. The skin was pale and unbroken. There was no scar, no scab, not even a faint pink line. It was as if the injury had never happened. My blood froze. I tore at the leg of my jeans, frantically checking my calf where the claw had touched me, where the cold had sunk in. Again. Nothing. The skin was clear. It was an utter absurdity. Was it a dream? All of it? A spectacularly vivid, terrifyingly specific nightmare brought on by the heat and the stress of a new roommate. The detail was too perfect. The shared pain. Her face. That tomb-like face in the final flash of light. Evelyn. My muscles tensed up. I moved cautiously out of the bedroom, my bare feet padding on the floor, trying not to make a sound. Step by step. The living room was just as it had been. The cheap couch, the crooked coffee table, the faint smell of dust and old wood. But she wasn't there. The air was still. Her door was slightly ajar. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No humming. No breathing. The silence was absolute. I pushed the door open. Her room was neat. The bed was made. A single suitcase stood next to her closet. It looked untouched. It was the room of a person who had either just arrived or had never truly been there at all. I saw it on her nightstand, the small hand-carved wooden figure, the one I'd glimpsed in her hand, the one I'd seen in the dream just before the attack. I picked it up. It was worn smooth with age, the wood dark and dense. It was vaguely humanoid, its limbs too long, its head just a featureless knob. It felt cold to the touch. Ancient. I put it down and backed out of the room. My head was spinning with a series of questions. Had she been real? Or was I going insane? Had I hallucinated an entire person? I walked through the small apartment, my panic mounting with every normal, undisturbed object I saw. The kitchen. A single coffee mug, the one I had used yesterday, sat clean in the drying rack. No knife was out of place. No salt spilled on the counter. I moved to the front door. The chain was unlatched. The deadbolt was thrown back. It was unlocked. I remembered slamming it, bolting it. I pulled the door open and looked into the building's hallway. It was dim and smelled of stale air, exactly as it always did. There was no sign of a struggle. No splintered wood. Nothing. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the stillness. My back pressed against the wall. I slid down to the floor, my head in my hands. The physical proof was gone. The world was telling me I was crazy, that the terror, the entity, the shared wounds, none of it was real. But I knew it was. I could still feel the phantom weight on my chest. I could still hear the tearing canvas if I listened hard enough. I could still see her hollow eyes burned onto the inside of my eyelids. A dull ache started in the center of my chest. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a low, persistent throb, an irritation. I ignored it at first, attributing it to the stress, the phantom sensations. But it grew stronger, a localized point of heat right over my sternum. I unbuttoned the top of my shirt, my fingers fumbling. I pulled the collar open and looked down. There, on my skin, was a mark. It was not a fresh wound. It was not bleeding. It was a scar, raised, pale, and perfectly formed. 3 prongs branching out from a central point. A trident. A claw mark. It looked old, as if it had been there for years. A permanent feature of my body that I had somehow never noticed until this exact moment. I couldn't believe my eyes. I touched it. The scar tissue was hard, different from the skin around it. It was the signature. The brand. The thing had left its mark after all, not as a wound that would heal, but as a permanent claim, proof. And in that moment, I knew. She was gone. David, her last roommate, had disappeared, and now Evelyn was gone. The pattern was there. The entity didn't just kill, it erased. It scrubbed the scene clean, leaving only the anchor and the scar. My whole body froze. A vibration. On the coffee table. My phone. The buzzing was loud, violent in the silence. It made me jump. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Who would be calling? It buzzed again, a persistent, demanding rattle. I crawled over to it, my hand shaking as I reached for it. The screen lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. An email from the Roommate Finder website I had used. My soul flew away. The words on the screen were simple. Clinical. Congratulations! You have a new applicant for your vacant room. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. Vacant room. The words echoed in the hollow space in my mind. The ad was still active. Of course it was. The room was empty. Evelyn was gone. David was gone. A new person would come. A new tether would be found. The game would begin again. But who? Who was the host now? So, who? A shiver ran down my spine. I knew the answer before the question had fully formed. I pushed myself to my feet. I walked on numb legs toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. Each step was heavy, deliberate. I felt like I was walking to a gallows. My hand rested on the doorknob. It was cold. I turned it and pushed the door open. The small windowless room was dark. I reached for the light switch. The fluorescent bulb above the mirror flickered on with a hum, casting a sterile blue-white light over everything. My reflection stared back at me from the cheap medicine cabinet mirror. I looked tired. My face was pale. My eyes were wide. But it was me. It was still my face. For a moment, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. It was just a scar. I had survived. I was still me. And then I tried to smile. The muscles in my face didn't respond. I tried again, focusing, willing a change in my expression. Nothing happened. My face remained a mask, a blank, neutral slate. My lips didn't twitch. My eyes didn't crinkle. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. I stared into my own eyes. The fear was still there, somewhere deep inside. A distant pilot light in a vast, cold furnace. But on the surface was wrong. My eyes looked flat, devoid of light. They were just dark circles on a pale face. They looked hollow. Her face from the dream. The gaunt, ancient face with the empty sockets. It wasn't what I looked like. It was what I felt like. I was a house with no one home. The occupant had fled, and something else had taken up residence. I raised a hand and slowly, deliberately, touched my own cheek. The skin felt like someone else's. I ran my fingers along my jaw, over my lips. There was no feeling, just the sensation of pressure, a clinical observation, the cycle. It needed an anchor. It needed a lure. It needed a quiet, unnerving roommate who sat in the dark and waited. It needed someone to post the ad for the vacant room. I looked at my own hollow eyes in the mirror. I heard a sound, faint and distant, but coming from inside my own head. A simple, looping, discordant melody. I was humming.